common outfall. And then you get down to the smaller agencies, and then there are a handful of agencies in the North Bay that actually have dry season discharge prohibitions, so their nutrient loading in the dry season is zero. So historically, even though the bay is very nutrient enriched, it has been resilient to the impacts of nutrients. And so you haven't seen the kinds of eutrophication or hab blooms that you have in other estuaries around the country. That's because algae, and phytoplankton is another word for algae, it's a plant and it needs light, it needs nutrients, which it has plenty of to grow. But the bay, if you've ever gone swimming in it, is very turbid. You can't see, light doesn't penetrate very far past the surface. So that is one layer of protection. There's very strong tidal mixing. There's high winds that reduce nutrient concentrations. And then filter feeding clams in the bay also actually reduce the concentrations of phytoplankton once they do grow. So that resilience broke down in 2022 when we saw the harmful algal bloom and the fish kills that were associated with it. And so that put us into a whole new regime of figuring out how to control nutrients. So the regulatory structure here in the San Francisco Bay Area for controlling nutrients is the Nutrient Watershed Permit that is issued by the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. And so this was initiated long before there was ever a harmful algal bloom in the bay that we wanted to respond to. This was instituted on a precautionary basis back in 2014, and the permit required monitoring and reporting of nutrient loads, support for the science through the nutrient management strategy that's housed at SFEI, and a study on nutrient reduction via optimization and upgrade so that we knew what the options were for traditional treatment to reduce nutrients. When the 2019 permit was reissued, it continued to have monitoring and reporting and support for the science, but it required a follow-on set of studies, nutrient reduction via recycled water and nature-based solutions. And that's what Ellen and Ian are going to be talking about in the next presentation. And then the 2024 permit was responding to the harmful algal bloom in 2022 and the smaller one in 2023. And so in addition to monitoring and reporting and support for the science, it required regional planning and then load limitations here in red. That's sort of, don't want to bury the lead here. And compliance milestone reporting that shows how we are working towards achieving those load limitations. So what those load limitations look like is a 40% aggregate dry season nutrient load reduction. So what you see here in this graph is our aggregate loads to the bay in the dry season over time since we've started monitoring. And then at the end, what it looks like after we achieve those reductions. So they weren't allocated equally across all agencies. It wasn't like you get a 40% reduction, you get a 40% reduction. It was allocated based on current performance. So basically you set a target threshold of concentration of TIN, total inorganic nitrogen, in the effluent. You multiply it by your loads, and you get your nutrient load limitation. So for agencies that are already discharging fairly low concentrations, they are either already meeting or don't have far to go before meeting their load limits. But for agencies with very high concentrations, it's a much more significant reduction. So there are agencies that are required to actually reduce 60 to 70%. The permit comes with a 10-year compliance schedule, which is the maximum that the state allows under their compliance schedule policy, but the Water Board has acknowledged that there are types of projects, especially projects with multiple benefits like nature-based solutions and recycled water, that may need more time, and they are committed to finding a regulatory pathway to support these projects as they move towards fruition. So what are agencies planning on? This is an idealized picture showing the types of projects that are out there. So synergistic upgrades when aging infrastructure is replaced. So we don't want to be scrapping new facilities or stranding assets. So near-term opportunities with existing infrastructure. There are agencies that have excess dry weather capacity, for example, or agencies that can achieve their load limitations with optimization efforts. And those tend to be faster and less expensive to implement. But ultimately, this, rainbow in the future that we want to see is a future with multi-benefit projects, which I've been told is a terrible phrase. So let's say projects with multiple benefits. So recycled water and nature-based solutions, and that's why we're here today. We are required to submit alternatives for each agency to comply with their load limits that they're considering. That was a report that was due on April 1st, just a few days ago. And there were 6 agencies that had identified so far that they are planning on nature-based solutions to be part of their compliance strategy. So that was great news to hear. So if you are curious about nutrient reduction or regulation or the watershed permit, you can find out more on our website, which has all of the reports that you're going to hear, which are cross-posted with SFEI. It has all of our reporting data as well. And of course, you can contact me. My email address is here. So next, I would like to pass the virtual mic to Ellen Plain and Ian Wren with SFEI, and they're going to give an overview of the nature-based solutions report that they completed on behalf of BACWA for the second watershed permit.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Lorian. So we're going to be giving just a general overview today. We've produced a lot of materials in relation to this project that are all available on our website to peruse in more detail. The purpose today is just to let you know what's out there, and we want to spend the bulk of today's session on the panel discussion. So we'll just give you some of the high level. So as Lorian mentioned, this scientific study was a requirement of the 2019 Nutrient Watershed Permit. And the purpose of it was really to identify opportunities for treatment wetlands around the bay and really evaluate some of the opportunities and constraints associated with implementing those at the various agencies around the region. And we also looked at nutrient reduction potential from these possible treatment wetlands at the various facilities. So we conducted a survey at the beginning of this project of all the dischargers and asked them sort of what would be your top reasons to pursue a nature-based solution project. And you can see some of the things that came up were sea level rise adaptation, reducing CECs, habitat restoration and enhancement, and nutrient removal. And given what Lorian's just described to us, I think that number 4, nutrient removal, has probably risen in the ranks since this survey was conducted years ago before the new permit was issued. But you can see here that there really are a lot of reasons to pursue nature-based solution projects for wastewater treatment and polishing beyond some of the, just the wastewater focused reasons. A lot of these plants are very exposed to sea level rise, very low lying. Water runs downhill, and so it makes the most sense to have these plants located right on the bay shore. And so that's definitely top of mind as we're thinking about the development of these nature-based solutions projects. How can they increase the resilience of the plants to sea level rise while achieving these other benefits? Some of the constraints that were highlighted by the respondents to the survey were the cost and funding, availability of land, many other competing issues that the agencies are dealing with, as well as regulatory hurdles. And we'll touch on some of those topics throughout our presentation. So this was a project with multiple phases. We had an early scoping and evaluation report. We then moved into a desktop screening analysis. So this was a GIS analysis, just an initial suitability. Where are there opportunities at a high level to pursue nature-based solutions at the various treatment plants? And we did that for each one of the facilities. Then we had site evaluations for a select subset of those, and then went into the cost estimate and concept design phase for 3 facilities. So the first phase I mentioned was this desktop suitability analysis. And so this was really just feeding into GIS, where are there opportunities that are near treatment plants, that are not on steep slopes, that have appropriate land use and land cover characteristics. So really just that high level, can we pull out the facilities that do have a lot of potential for pursuing nature-based solutions? In general, these projects take a lot more space than some of the gray infrastructure upgrades that Lorian was describing. And so that can be a big constraint, especially in places that are located in dense urbanized areas. You can see what I'm showing on the map here is the various treatment plants around the region, symbolized by the results of that GIS analysis. So the green dots had the highest potential according to our analysis, and the red had the least potential according to our analysis. And then the size of the dots indicates the nutrient load at that facility. And so each of these plants, we produced a fact sheet, which is available at our website, where you can learn more about what those opportunities look like, as well as some high-level calculations that we performed about the potential nutrient load reductions. And what we did is, after we produced those fact sheets, we talked to all the managers at the various facilities and got their feedback, and incorporated that into the fact sheet as well. And through that process, we were able to identify 8 agencies that had particularly high interest in continuing the conversation to identify opportunities and constraints. And so with these facilities, we did a site visit, we walked around, looked at the possible opportunities that had been identified in the GIS analysis, and went a bit deeper into assessing, okay, what could be the multiple benefits of a project here? Could we achieve some of the goals of the facility, whether that be, increasing opportunities for recreational access for the community, or increasing resilience to sea level rise, or potentially working with nearby partners who are doing habitat restoration efforts? Where are there some of those synergies to pursue in terms of opportunities? And then also, what are the constraints at that facility? What are we really needing to work around, and what are some of the challenges to implementation? And so there's a report for each of these 8 facilities that goes into a bit more of that detail there. Then we broke it down even farther with 3 of the facilities, so Fairfield, Sassoon, Delta Diablo, and San Jose, where we worked with the engineering firm HDR to develop some high-level cost estimates, as well as developing in a bit more detail the concept design for a potential nature-based solution project. I'm not going to go into detail on all 3 of those, but just want to give you an example of some of those concepts. This is for the San Jose Santa Clara Regional Wastewater Facility. So giving you a sense of what those concept designs look like. Here's an example on the left of a potential horizontal levee project that could integrate a seepage slope into the planned levee project that's being built through the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline Project. And that could be integrated with restoration of Pond A18 in the upper left of the screen here. So one that would require a lot of collaboration with a lot of partners, but could be an interesting opportunity there. And then on the right side of the screen, a different opportunity to repurpose some of their decommissioned sludge lagoons and convert those into a unit cell open water wetland system that would have flow through these various cells and remove nutrients, remove some CECs, and then bring the water back out to the outfall there. So some early concepts for one of those facilities, and definitely would invite you to peruse some of the materials for the others as well. In conjunction with this work, we were also able to pursue a few additional paths of inquiry. One of those was the topic of dual purpose equalization basins. So we worked with Scarlett Kilpatrick, who's at UC Berkeley, to develop this short report about, where are there opportunities to make better use of existing basins that sit empty the vast majority of the time. So these are basins that are only really used during wet weather events for storage, or maybe occasionally during, for emergency operations at the plant, et cetera. And those are places where, they could be doing some wastewater polishing work during the dry season, in addition to being storage during the wet season. And Scarlett's put together some great ideas about what the engineering and design could look like for systems like that. And then we also wanted to highlight that the fact that this is not a new concept. There are existing treatment wetlands in the San Francisco Bay region that are performing a lot of work, providing a lot of benefits. And we have a lot of lessons learned from those systems that the staff who work at those facilities have, just a great deal of experience to share. And so we wanted to capture all those lessons learned and share those as these various other facilities embark on developing nature-based solutions in conjunction with the new nutrient watershed permit. And so those case studies, Ian is going to go into a little bit more detail now.
Thanks, Ellen, and thanks for joining us, everyone. Yeah, as Ellen indicated, there are several longstanding treatment wetlands in the region. Oraloma gets a lot of attention lately, but Mount View is one of the earliest treatment wetlands on the West Coast, dating back to the 70s. Hayward Marsh was implemented in the 80s, although it's no longer in use. And Las Cañas and Petaluma are some other interesting examples, and there are a couple that aren't even represented here. But I encourage you to look into those case studies if you want to learn about a little bit more, and the folks at those agencies are a good resource. Next. Yeah, this is just some quick aerials of what these types of sites look like. Las Cañas is basically ponds in ag fields adjacent to developed impacted tidal marsh. Up in Petaluma, they've had a long-standing series of oxidation ponds, and then more recently, these sort of circular oval-shaped features are tertiary treatment polishing ponds. Oraloma has a horizontal levee and open water wetland. Mount View has a series of open water wetlands that have been around for quite some time and still working as intended. And Hayward Marsh was operating as open water wetland for quite some time, but was discontinued over the last couple of years. Next slide. Yeah, so some of the lessons learned from this study involve that there is a significant potential for nutrient reduction with nature-based solutions, but it's not a silver bullet to meet those types of 40% reductions that Lorian mentioned earlier on. As you can see, those agencies in the urban core of the Bay have little to no meaningful opportunity for nature-based solutions, whereas those on the periphery have more, and that's largely just a function of land. Horizontal levees are very interesting for a number of solutions, but at scale, they're probably not going to be cost effective for treating secondary treated wastewater. It's probably looking more promising for concentrated brine like reverse osmosis concentrate. And a lot of the existing sites that are serving as case studies now weren't necessarily built for nutrient removal. And so there's not a lot of data, but what is available indicates that you're getting pretty significant removal from those sites. Next slide. Yeah, and also just I think a key thing is that internal champions at these wastewater agencies are really important. Here's a photo of SASM with Mark Grushev, recently retired. Mark Newman, I believe, is going to take his place. And so they've had some interesting opportunities there and some legacy work that hopefully can be translated. I think from the folks that we've talked to at all these agencies, the staff that have been operating them for years are very dedicated, really have a strong sense of pride in these projects and are happy to show them off. And if they're planned intentionally, they're really the whole multi-benefit thing can really come to fruition through additional recreational and habitat values. Next slide. In terms of the regulatory issues, wetland mitigation is a key consideration, particularly for horizontal levees, which may have to encroach into wetlands. And the mitigation requirements associated with that can be significant. So, in areas where habitat value is poor and levees are being considered to provide a long-term sustainability of surrounding tidal marsh habitat. I think in the long term, we need to kind of figure out how that can be done without generating undue mitigation requirements for these projects, which really are a disincentive to do these types of things. Next slide. And then also governance. A lot of these projects require multiple landowners, multiple funding sources, and cooperation amongst multiple parties. And so these aren't the types of projects where one wastewater agency can even really do them. They really need to be thought of as a more holistic solution. And so that's probably where, as a region, we need to start moving more aggressively. Next slide. And then so the reasons for why we should be moving now and thinking long term is that a lot of these projects do take some time. And that's partly why the nutrient watershed permit allows a bit more time for recycled water or nature-based solutions. And that's partly in recognition, not just of the construction phase, but also the governance related issues, the partnerships, gathering the funding. And now that we have risk to federal funding likely in place, this is all more of an unknown and could take even longer than we expected. Next slide. We still do have some pretty solid funding sources. Measure AA has funded several designing and planning studies to start getting these projects off the ground. There's other state NBS funding, Prop 68 and Prop 4 and 1, I think, have been good and still remain as good options. Some of the federal sources are really up in the air at this point, but yeah, TBD on that. So next slide. And then so on our next steps, we do have some funding from the EPA to help move this forward a little bit further along. And we're hoping to expand the number of the agencies that we do these site-specific analyses for, and continue engaging the wider community in forums such as this to spread the word and to help break down maybe some of those governance challenges that we're talking about. And we will continue to seek funding for these types of studies, and we're happy to collaborate on trying to seek funding for agencies that want to do these on your own. And so, yeah, Ellen and I and others at SFEI are a resource, and please get in touch with any questions. Next step, I think we're moving on to, be going back to the panel discussion. Okay, so I am doing that. Unless you had anything you wanted to say, Sasha.
I was just going to say, if there are one or two questions about your presentation, I think we have time to take them.
Great. Yeah, and feel free to ask questions in the chat as well, for us as we keep going, or for the moderators as we move forward. If we can't get all to them, get to all of them today, we'll certainly follow up. Yeah, Arthur.
Hi, thanks. Well, it's an exciting presentation, but I'm a little confused because you did say it's not a silver bullet, so I'm really confused about how effective it actually is. I mean, I want it to be really effective because I'm very supportive of this, but after the two presentations, I'm a little confused over.
Yeah, I totally understand, and good to see you, Arthur. It's been a while.
Likewise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the main constraint in our region is just availability of land and the cost of land. So we all know that. And so if that was not a function, then we could probably achieve the 40% reduction simply by that. But so it's really just finding the right partnerships without impacting, sensitive wetland resources, and doing it in the most, technically sound way that can really optimize the nutrient removal and nutrient removal is not always totally in line with optimizing habitat or recreation. So it's yeah, so that's why we say it's not a silver bullet, but could still be a significant part of the puzzle.
Great.
Aaron.
Good morning, all. This is Aaron Weiner from West County Wastewater District. We're one of the groups that are looking at this kind of living levee or horizontal levee application, and I think we have a little bit of a unique situation in that we're looking at it really only for protection against sea level rise, as opposed to nutrient removal or that type of thing. Our situation is that our effluent is pumped 5 miles to the south and is discharged jointly with the City of Richmond treatment facility. So I'm wondering if anybody else has this, kind of is in this framework and is looking at how you would provide irrigation, if you didn't have the effluent.
Yeah, I don't know if Ellen, if you want to.
Yeah, I can take that one. So as you say, Aaron, there's sort of a range of different types of living levees, ecotone levees, horizontal levees that different projects are pursuing around the region. Typically, it seems the terminology ecotone levee or living levee doesn't necessarily imply any sort of subsurface seepage slope for treatment purposes. It's more just creating a more gradual slope at the back of a tidal marsh that can provide habitat benefits and a little bit of space above the high tide line for wildlife refuge and a little bit of space for marsh migration as sea levels rise, that sort of thing. And you ask a good question about irrigation. I know this has been a challenge at some of the places where ecotone levees have been implemented. Obviously they provide the most benefit if they're planted with native species. And getting those established can be tough, especially during drought years if there's not irrigation. But would be happy to connect with you, Aaron, and try to connect you potentially with other folks who are looking into some of those irrigation questions and see if we can help with troubleshooting that question. It's an interesting one.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron. Arden?
Hi, hey, good morning, everyone. So my question was, and this is kind of a follow-up. I know, Ellen, you came to our plant, Silicon Valley Clean Water. You looked at and did some sort of initial assessment, and we're still interested in moving forward with keeping this in our toolbox. I believe we cannot use this as a 100% nutrient reduction, but it can be partial reduction or a certain percentage of the nutrient reduction. But the question was, or is, the effectiveness and reliability of nature-based solution. As nature works the way it works. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, or maybe something in the middle. So if we go with this approach of nature-based solution, which is very exciting and one of the most liked solutions, the compliance is not as forgiving. Nature may decide to do something different, but the compliance wouldn't adjust itself to with the variations in nature. So how much confidence or data or any insights you have if we select this as one of the potential solutions, how do we feel confident that this will work especially when it's needed to work, to stay compliant?
Good question, Arvin. I would generally defer to Robert, but I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. I think the short answer could be that the water board is open to relying on treatment factors that have been established through a combination of literature and site-specific investigations to basically, credit you for an assumed amount of nutrient removal based on the acreage and flow put of whatever kind of system you're doing. The exact mechanisms of that have not been worked out, but I think Robert's going to touch on that in our questions and follow up. But it's a great question and happy to follow up on that. Yeah, I think so. Nate had a good question off the top of my head. I am not familiar with jihads, but maybe somebody else could chime in there. And I think we should move on to the Q&A. Okay. All right, so yeah, we have a series of questions, and we have a couple panelists that have been so kind to join us, including Emily Corwin from SFDI, Robert Schliff from the Water Board, Amanda Engledge from Sea of Palo Alto, and Jackie Zipkin from EBDA. So I will let them do a maybe 1 minute intro of themselves and their connection to NBS, and then we'll get into it. Emily, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks to the San Francisco Estuary Partnership and BACWA for organizing this. My name is Emily Corwin. I'm a water resources engineer, and I'm the director of strategic initiatives here at the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And my connections to nature-based solutions, most relevant to this conversation, go back to my role at the Fairfield Sassoon Sewer District and being one of the folks that Ian and Ellen initially met with and kind of scoped out the nature-based solutions opportunities at our site at this Fairfield Sassoon Sewer District. And based on their evaluation, we evaluated 100 alternatives for a 100-acre community treatment wetland at the wastewater treatment plant. I'm also I'll put a link into the chat, but it was mentioned that SFEI has been working on a nutrient management strategy within the Bay for over 10 years. And we have a new report that kind of summarizes the history of that 10 years of science. And then the other connection I'll mention is to a project that we're working on with the State Coastal Conservancy around living shorelines and design guidance for living shorelines. So this is really focused on the solutions that are in the subtidal and tidal range, but there's kind of that connection if these nature-based solutions that wastewater treatment plants are considering are kind of transitioning into the tidal zone, there could be complementary solutions related to eelgrass restoration, nearshore reefs, things like that. So if you're interested in joining that, or learning more about that, we have a quarterly Living Shorelines Collaborative that is open to everybody to join. So
Thanks, Emily. Robert?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Robert Schliff. I'm a senior engineer at the San Francisco Bay Water Board, and I manage one of our NPDES wastewater permitting sections that basically covers nearly all of the municipal and industrial wastewater plants that discharge to the Bay. This also includes our nutrient watershed permit. So my connection to nature-based solution projects is really through the regulatory and permitting side. I think Lorian kind of mentioned the 3 different versions of the watershed permit, and I worked on all of those. And I've also worked with staff on the San Leandro treatment wetland permit, which is our most recent permit that we issued for a nature-based solution in 2022.
Thanks, Robert. Samantha?
Hi, I'm Samantha Englich. I'm a senior engineer with the City of Palo Alto, and I'm the city's project manager on its horizontal levee pilot project. The city has been interested in nature-based solutions for a while now, and has been working on designing and constructing a small horizontal levee in its baylands since about 2018. And right now we are gearing up for construction this year. This is one of those projects where the main goal isn't nutrient removal or gaining credits for treatment of the wastewater that's being used for irrigation. Instead, the main goal is habitat enhancement and sea level rise adaptation. And we are happy to gain additional benefits from the polishing of the wastewater being used at the site, but it's not the main design element. Ultimately, we at the city are hoping to use this permanent pilot to gain more information on these systems in the hopes of convincing our community to spend what we think is going to be additional money needed for larger implementation of horizontal levees when we go to improve the city's existing flood control levees. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ian.
Thanks, Sam. And finally, Jackie.
Good morning. My name is Jackie Zipkin. I'm the general manager of the East Bay Dischargers Authority. And as Lorian mentioned, EBDA, as we call ourselves, is a common outfall for 6 wastewater treatment plants in Alameda County. And all of those plants that are adjacent to the shoreline have been engaged for a long time in discussions about different nature-based solutions opportunities. So Robert mentioned the San Leandro treatment plant is moving into construction on a treatment wetland, hopefully shortly. And Ian and Hayes, who's on the call, have been heavily involved in moving that forward. the city of Hayward kicked off yesterday the next phase of their nature-based solutions project, where they're looking at converting areas of their oxidation ponds that are currently used for wet weather storage into summer treatment wetlands to coincide with the dry season nutrient reductions that are needed, and still maintaining the wet weather function in the winter, and then also possibly a horizontal levee and near shore discharge associated with that. And then I've been leading the First Mile project, which is a horizontal levee project in Oraloma Marsh, which is just south of the Oraloma treatment plant, where we're looking to develop a horizontal levee that's approximately a mile in length. So we call it the First Mile, and we've been using that project as kind of a tool to work through some of the regulatory challenges associated with these projects, and hopefully pave the way for other projects that that go alongside and after us. Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. And so I'm just going to jump into it. We have a series of questions, and then we'll try to stop around in about 8 minutes to open it up to other questions. So Robert, question about permitting. What broad-based, what should people who are thinking about nature-based solutions think about in the permitting process, and what processes or considerations is the water board given to help simplify the permitting process?
Okay, thank you. So for those that don't know, the first stop would really be the BRIT, which is the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team. And this is composed of a number of federal and state agencies, including the Water Board. And it was really set up to improve the permitting process for multi-benefit projects along the shoreline. So that's where you would start, and they would be able to tell you about all, the permits you would need and resources available and so on. But what I wanted to do to answer this question is really focus on NPDES permits, because that's more in my wheelhouse. Like, what would you need to do to get permitted for a nature-based solution in your NPDES permit or a new one? And there's really, I think, 4 things to think about. The first is our basin plan actually prohibits discharges of wastewater that don't receive an initial dilution of 10:1. So you would need to get an exception to that. And there are 4 exceptions in our basin plan, and there's really 2 of them that I think will cover basically 100% of these projects. The first one is you just show that it's an inordinate burden to construct a deep water outfall, which shouldn't be too hard. It's a lot of pipeline to put in and so on. And then you just show that you're achieving a higher level of treatment. And that's kind of the point of these projects. So most of them are going to fall into that category. The second one that I think could apply is that it's part of a reclamation project. And that can come up when folks are thinking about doing indirect or direct potable reuse. You got to get rid of this brine. That's your exception. That brine is part of a reclamation project. So getting the exception shouldn't be too challenging, but it is something you need to think about. The second thing is really, how do you comply with your water quality-based effluent limits? If many of you are going out of a deep water outfall, you're typically getting 10:1 dilution for copper, cyanide, some of those pollutants, and you don't actually meet the water quality objective at your in your effluent. So what you need to do is do a mixing zone study and show something that's as small as practicable, and we would grant a mixing zone for some of these pollutants, and that's exactly what we did in the San Leandro treatment wetland permit that we issued a few years ago. The third thing to think about, and I think this was brought up earlier in one of the questions, is compliance evaluation. Like, where are you measuring compliance? A lot of times we've just done it before the treatment wetland because most of the limits can be met. If you look at the San Leandro permit, it's kind of a mixture. Some are before the treatment wetland, and some of the compliance points are after it goes through that treatment process. Now, where it gets a little bit tricky is if you're installing a horizontal levee where it's just going to be subsurface and just flow out into the bay. It's hard to collect samples at the end of that levee. So what we'd be looking to do is have compliance before it goes into that treatment system, but then do some sort of adjustment to the effluent limits to give dischargers credit for the treatment that's going to occur. And then the last thing, which really isn't necessarily like a permitting thing, is there's always a requirement for proper operation and maintenance. And with some of the treatment wetland facilities we've seen, sometimes you can just get too much vegetation where you're not pushing enough flow through, or there could be short circuiting. So it's just something to keep in mind that that's a permit requirement that may be something that's a little bit different than what wastewater plant operators are used to doing. So stop there. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. We could talk about this all day.
Yeah.
And as Jackie mentioned, Hayes, Morehouse, and I have gone through a lot of this lately. So if you have any questions, let us know. Moving on to Sam. What are some of the scientific unknowns or issues that you think we as a region need to answer to make these systems more attractive?
Yeah, so despite a lot of science already being done on these systems, like Ian, like you presented earlier, there's still a lot of unknowns, especially like site-specific unknowns. So in particular, when in the City of Palo Alto Horizontal Levee pilot project, where one of the main goals is adaptation to sea level rise, there's a pretty big data gap in terms of sediment accretion and accumulation rates that we can apply to our specific site. And so gaining more information on that is really important to answer questions about the system's resiliency and reliability in the future. And those questions come up not only for our community, but also when you go to get permits for these projects. Sea level rise adaptation tends to be one of the key questions that needs to be answered during permitting. So that's one area. The second area that we've experienced specifically here in Palo Alto in our project is gaining more information about how key species are using the nature-based solution or the horizontal levee. So we have some ideas and some, guesses, educated guesses on how some key species like the salt marsh harvest mouse are going to use the horizontal levee. But we don't have direct data to tell us, are they going to use it for just foraging and nesting? Are they using it just for refugia during high tides? Are they just kind of, or are they doing more than that? And so Palo Alto in particular has some planned studies to try and answer some of those questions after we construct the project. But it would have been really helpful to have some studies to cite in the beginning and during design to make sure that we're optimizing those parts of the project.
Thanks, Sam. And Jackie, is anybody thinking about some of the potential liabilities associated with land application of water and nature-based solutions in terms of maybe PFAS or nutrients or other contaminants?
Good question, Ian. And I see Tom Levin put a really relevant question to that one in the chat. And the short answer is on the First Mile project, we have not had that come up. We are in a situation where the wastewater would come from the EBDIS system, probably the Oraloma treatment plant. But the land on which the horizontal levee would be built belongs to East Bay Regional Parks District. So we are partnering closely with them. But thankfully, this liability question has not yet come up, but maybe that's because we have had engineers and scientists in the room and not lawyers. I think, one of the things that we've really been thinking about is how do we design a system that can be maintained over time so that we're not accumulating metals or PFAS or other contaminants in the system. And so that's a research area. I know that the team from UC Berkeley has been looking at the Oraloma horizontal levee demonstration site. And if anyone has not been out to that site and is interested, I enjoy giving tours, as do the Berkeley students that are working out there. But they're doing a lot of great work looking at subsurface materials to absorb different contaminants, like using a fluorosorb material to absorb PFAS. And that's showing some effectiveness, but it's a system that would need to be maintained. We'd have to look at how long does it take to get to breakthrough on a system where we have granular activated carbon or fluorosorb or some other added material that's not natural to the system, and build it in such a way that we could go in and replace that media. So I don't think that those concepts are necessarily in conflict. We need to continue to research the fate of the contaminants in the natural system, and then also think about ways that we can build these systems so that they can be maintained to prevent any buildup of contaminants. That doesn't necessarily prevent future lawsuits or liability. That's something that we'll have to keep talking about. But I think as scientists and engineers, the best we can do right now is try to understand the issue and design for it.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, finally, Emily, where do you see opportunities for partnerships between different agencies and utilities in the context of regional shoreline adaptation or wetland restoration?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ian. Well, there's three kind of partnership opportunities maybe I'll mention. The first is around the point that you brought up about the constraints in some areas of the bay, and kind of not all wastewater treatment plants have the land to be able to implement nature-based solutions for nutrient removal. And this idea that some regions or some plants can, but they might not be particularly motivated for one reason or another to do it. But this idea that if they did, they could potentially trade those nutrient removal credits with other wastewater treatment plants in a more constrained, land constrained area that were still working to meet their nutrient removal targets. So just this idea of a regional trading that could leverage nature-based solutions in the places and at the treatment plants that are best suited to it. The second thing is, this was something we had initial conversations about when I was at Fairfield Sassoon, and thinking about, and it's very tricky. There's a lot to think through about this, but just that opportunity to explore of these treatment areas, these wetland treatment areas, also being mitigation banks, and a potential source of funding from nearby projects or impacts to the environment that are happening, where that funding to offset an impact somewhere else could be supporting long-term O&M of the nature-based solution at the wastewater treatment plant. So just kind of an interesting idea to explore, especially because funding is such an issue. And then the last kind of partnership opportunity I want to mention is, many of you know that SB 272 requires communities around the Bay to develop these regional shoreline adaptation plans by 2034, and wastewater treatment plans, by the nature of the service that we provide, are often in low-lying, vulnerable areas. And just this idea that, we're the kind of long-term planning of and infrastructure, be it the wastewater treatment plant, the pumps or the pipelines, and the long-term resiliency of those is really tightly linked to the communities where those facilities are located. And now there's a push for and an opportunity for wastewater treatment plants to really engage in the resiliency planning in the communities where they're located, which is just potentially going to open up new partnerships, new ways of thinking about resiliency and where nature-based solutions might be best, both for wastewater treatment and the communities. I know we're getting tight on time. The last thing I want to mention is that part of the question, Ian, was about kind of ecosystem goals. So it's amazing that, with European American colonization, 80% of the wetlands around the Bay were lost. And so, look down at my notes, in 1998, there were only 41,000 acres of wetlands in tidal marsh in the Bay. And right now we're at about 54,000 acres, and we have a goal to get up to 100,000 acres. That's quite a gap. And it's a significant gap to where we were, pre-colonization, and the destruction of those wetlands. So just thinking about the environmental goals that we have around the bay and these projects as being opportunities to help us get there and get back some of the wetlands that we lost over the last 100 years or so.
Thanks, Emily. Good to keep that in mind. It's impressive that we've done 54,000 in the last 20 plus years. Yeah, so we have a couple minutes. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Feel free to either raise your hand or fire them off in the chat. And if you can't get to those in the chat, we will follow up in writing. Yeah, thanks, Nate. Yeah,
I would
so
like to, I have one comment. Hi, this is Mary Skranik with RES, Resource Environmental Solutions. New to this group. This is phenomenal. I love the activity that's happening here, and people are starting to really get excited about treatment wetlands. We do a lot of treatment wetland work, especially large-scale wetlands on the order of thousands of acres, things like that. You may want to consider, looking at the public-private partnership statute that is currently allowable. I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring in the private entities to help actually garner a little bit more enthusiasm and capital to be able to build these larger projects in areas where there's land available. And the meaning, behind that is so that you can work with a firm that has, or an entity that from the private side that's able to guarantee performance. I know Arvind asked a question about, how do you kind of guarantee performance or efficiency, things like that. Some entities can actually guarantee performance, and then that's almost on a pay for performance type of project scale. Not sure if that's been considered by anyone here currently. We do that, so not trying to do a major marketing plug, but that is something that I think is really powerful, where if you have a question about whether or not the efficiency is going to stick for long term, and then if there's an entity that's able to actually implement a project and provide that long-term stewardship to make sure and ensure that that performance is achieved and maintained, not just over a 1 year period from the contractor, but over 5, 10, 20 years. So just want to throw that out there, that there's definitely entities out there that can handle, like, taking off the risk, guaranteeing performance, making sure that these projects are actually going to are sustainable, and by those that have implemented thousands of acres of wetlands across the nation. So thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, it's important to remind us that there is an ecosystem of providers and not just the traditional consulting firms that can help us do this kind of stuff. Okay, Mark has a question regarding SASM has a deep water outfall. Can the water board clarify whether we would lose our dilution ratio if we went to a horizontal levee and nature-based solution with a revised or new discharge permit? So I think this is to you, Robert. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you'd keep it for what's going out your deep water outfall, but if you'd be going to a new discharge point, that's where I mentioned before, is you'd have to do a dilution study to see what amount of dilution you would get at that shallow water point. So you would not get the 10 to 1. And that's exactly what San Leandro did. Most of their wastewater goes out to deep water outfall, and they shifted a portion of it to shallow water.
Yeah, and I can attest that that was a relatively painless process. And we've gone through all the other permits too. So the permitting is not, takes time, but it's not terrible. So shouldn't stop you from doing these. Yeah, any other last questions?
I have one, Ian.
Okay. Yes, David.
Hi, everyone. I'm kind of curious why we're not thinking, why we're limiting ourselves to just the spot where the outfall from the treatment plant is located. We have a number of pipelines that run up and down the shorelines that might in the future be a source of water for a wetland. I think in particular, East Bay Mud has a long pipeline that goes all the way to the Richmond refinery of Chevron. And I presume over the timeframes that we're thinking about, there won't be a Chevron refinery making gasoline there anymore. So that's an opportunity over a relatively long distance to use existing pipeline infrastructure. And I think that was also the existing pipeline infrastructure is one of the things that might make the first mile viable because there's a recycled water pipeline that heads in the direction. So I'm curious from other people here if there are opportunities where existing pipelines on the shoreline could allow us to move wastewater effluent to places where we could build wetlands where there's more available land.
Great question, and I think certainly to be thought of. I heard that in the 80s, San Francisco even tried to pump all their effluent to Central Valley, but didn't really work. So I think it's not off the table. I don't know, Jackie, maybe you want to take that in light of this pipeline and opportunities there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important point, and it's just a matter of where is the highest and best use for the wastewater and who's going to pay for it, right? Like, as long as Chevron's paying East Bay Med for that water, they're going to send it there. But if there's an alternative, if they no longer need it and they're looking for a place to send the water, I think there really is an opportunity. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say our study is not perfect, and there were a lot of constraints that we placed on ourselves, and I would welcome the opportunity to think a little more outside the box on it. Yeah, I don't know if Angela, if you had, good to see you here. And the concept of retooling purple pipe. So we have a lot of purple pipe that arguably has mixed benefits. I think it's been pushed for a couple decades now, but really has a single purpose. Maybe we could reuse it as a larger distribution system. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that. All right, well, I think on that, I will hand it back to Sasha to close out. And thank you again for everybody for participating. And please feel free to touch base with any of us. Maybe we could coordinate with Sasha to share all of our emails.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emily, Jackie, Robert, Samantha, and Ian for moderating. This has been a really interesting panel. And thank you also to Ellen Plain and Lorian Fono for presenting. Really informative, and I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining. I just wanted to let you know that we are planning another Transforming Shorelines Collaborative webinar, likely for this summer, focused on the lessons about operations and maintenance of horizontal levees based on the pilot project at Oraloma. So please stay tuned. If you are interested in getting on the mailing list for Transforming Shorelines Collaboratives, we don't send out very many emails. It's just about upcoming events. I put the link in the chat, and go to the subscribe tab and you can add your information there. So thanks so much, everybody. Yes, we can send the recording of the panel out to participants. And feel free to stay on and chat if you have questions. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Sasha.